She did ask for criticism, like what constructive criticism. What did I do that kept me off the air?
Honestly, I was just lazy and I forgot to put up the tweet, so my bad. Dear Santa, I've been very good LSU fan this year. What do I want for Christmas? LSU to beat Oklahoma, then go to win the Natty. For those who still think LSU's defense isn't good enough, I give them a lump of coal. And here's the thing. For LSU, and I think LSU fans can agree, the absolute best thing to happen to LSU was to get bumped down to number 2 a couple of weeks ago, where they said they were not a quote-unquote complete team.
And most importantly was Rob Mullins calling the defense out. I mean, sometimes you got to put bulletin board material up that come from obscure places. Mm-hmm. That was not obscure. That was called out on national television and directed to those 11 guys on that side of the ball.
They were dominant against Kellen Mond, and the Aggies dominant in their 37-10 victory over the Georgia Bulldogs in the SEC championship game. We'll talk more about LSU and that matchup against Oklahoma, but joining us right now, the man, the myth, the legend in the state of Mississippi, Richard Cross. Although now you may be number 2 on the list because the Lane train is headed to town. What'd you make of that hire?
I think it's the first time I've ever been called a legend, Peter, but I'll take it. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
Okay, so, Peter, you were in Oxford when Kermit Davis was announced as head coach, right, for his opening press conference party thing?
Factually correct. Yeah, I was there in the pavilion when they announced him, and there was obviously a lot of fans that were excited. We were there for, I think, might have been spring practice, or I can't remember why I was there. But, yeah, they were excited for it, Richard.
And there probably were about 1,000 people there, maybe 800. I don't know. They are expecting somewhere in the neighborhood of 5,000 people to show up at 1 o'clock on a Monday afternoon for the introduction of Lane Kiffin at the pavilion. Concession stands open, half-price beer being sold. I saw in the press release. This thing is wild. I mean, I've been so I grew up in Oxford. We moved here when I was 8 years old. First football game I really remember going to was in 1990. I worked at the Ole Miss radio network for, the better part of 20 years now. There are only a couple of moments that I can come up with that have generated more excitement on or off the field than the last 72 hours, which is crazy to say.
And creating excitement is what this athletic department needed to do. In fact, they talked about it. One of the reasons they made the change was because of the waning interest in the football program, the lack of butts in seats. This certainly gets that excitement level high. But let's get away from the emotion. How good of a fit is this for Ole Miss, given the fact that it's a little bit of a unique situation there? They are having to compete in the SEC West. How is Lane Kiffin going to fit in as a football coach once all the excitement dies down?
Well, I think we've got to wait and see. I mean, the first thing you think about with Lane Kiffin is offensive mind. And, over the last several years, and this year was different because it was a different type of offense with Rich Rod, calling the plays. But Ole Miss's identity as a football team has been, throwing the football, having success offensively. If you want to go back to the time that Hugh Freeze was there, fast forward to Phil Longo, and that was a different type of offense. It was an offense that didn't have much balance to it. And so, in today's college football landscape, that excites people. They've got to be better, and they've got to be functional defensively, because if you want to, win at a high level, you've obviously got to do it on both sides of the ball. I think Lane's reputation is one as being an innovative offensive mind, and I had somebody tell me that Pete Carroll says to this day that in that window of time when Lane was at Southern Cal, it's the best play caller he's ever been around. So I think that says something. I'll be interested to see how he puts together his staff and kind of how they delegate things. My thought is that Lane Kiffin is going to be the guy that calls the plays, or at least calls most of the plays. There may be some delegation there. So I think that piece of it is going to be fascinating to watch, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see that this falls into on the football side of things, how he puts together his staff. There's been a lot of discussion about this being a staff that is going to really impress people. I've had more than one person tell me that coaches like working with Lane Kiffin. So think whatever you want to about kind of his persona, Some of that's probably real. Some of that's probably exaggerated a bit. But coaches really like working for him. So we'll see what kind of staff they're able to put together.
Can we get that on record that Nick Saban enjoyed working with Lane Kiffin? I don't know if that ended up being the case, but other coaches
working under him,
right? Well, but that's the question, right? Because you brought up the fact that, and there's nobody that's ever going to doubt Lane Kiffin as a coordinator, Lane Kiffin as a play caller. He's fantastic, but has actually failed pretty spectacularly outside of this little run over at FAU. As being a head coach, right? I mean, he's 44 years old. He's been fired from the Raiders, fired from Southern Cal, left to Tennessee in issues. And so I look at it right now is how much has Lane, quote unquote, changed? Because there was all this, Chris Lowe puts out an article like every other week about Lane has changed down in Boca. Do you believe that to be the case, Richard?
Well, I've not spent any time around him, but I guess there are two things that I would look at here. One, were all of those people that hired him in the past, were they all stupid, non-football people that just didn't know what they were doing? I mean, okay, Al Davis a little crazy, we all know that, but he is an NFL owner and was a very successful business person, and you're talking about Tennessee and Southern Cal. So they didn't just completely take a flyer. There was obviously a maturity issue that Lane has talked about a lot and has admitted to at this point, and has talked himself about the fact that he's grown. I've watched some interviews with him and kind of some backstory pieces, and it's fascinating to me. I think the time that he spent in Tuscaloosa probably benefited him more than anything else. Mm-hmm. Did he and Nick Saban go at each other? Sure. Did Nick Saban want to, put his arms or his hands around his throat, just squeeze at points? Yeah, I think he probably did. But if you listen to Lane Kiffin talk about how he's grown, he says, it's not so much from a football standpoint, because I used to think that a football coach meant how many points can I put on the board and how many games can we win. Mm-hmm. And he's talked over and over about the development of players off the field and the way you practice and how you practice and the fact that it's not just about football. Now, sometimes we roll our eyes when we hear that, right? I mean, you hear the term student athlete and you're like, oh, yeah, right, sure, but what a joke. But I think the people that approach coaching from a standpoint where, yeah, we got to win, and yeah, we got to do plays, and be creative and be innovative and bring fans in, but also genuinely care about a player going to class and figuring out how to navigate difficult times in life and bouncing back from adversity and figuring out how to handle that. I think once you prove to a player that actually matters to you and you're not just giving it lip service, I think the buy-in and the trust factor goes to a different place. So that's an interesting piece. I wasn't trying to be philosophical here.
Yeah, no, we appreciate it. Richard, there were 3 jobs open in the SEC. I think at times we heard issues going on at Missouri. Jim Sturk, the list that he had wasn't necessarily in line with what the administration was looking for. At Arkansas, I think they made a good hire with Pittman, but I don't know that he was in their top 5 originally. As I look at Lane Kiffin being hired here, maybe outside of Mike Norvell, I have to imagine that it was Kiffin that was at least in their top 2 or 3. How close were they to targeting a guy from the initial outset and being able to not only have interest from him, but close the deal as well?
Chris, I believe they started out with Mike Norvell as their number 1 target. And they weren't entirely sure after that. I think there was a group of guys that included Billy Napier at Louisiana Lafayette. Eli Drinkwitz's name, I think, was probably in that mix at Appalachian State. Lane Kiffin was there. I don't know initially how high Lane Kiffin's name was, but I think very quickly after Keith Carter started this search, he zeroed in on, okay, it's going to be Mike Norvell or it's going to be Lane Kiffin. Mm-hmm. And as it became evident later in the week that Mike Norvell was probably going to take the Florida State job, and to me, there's some credit that goes here in that they didn't chase somebody just for the sake of chasing them. It's, we're going to chase this guy, in the case of Norvell, until we realize he's not coming here. He's going somewhere else. And at that point, and as soon as we know that to be the case, we're moving on. We're not going to chase the hot girl that absolutely is going to just continue to tell us, no, I'm going to the prom with you. And then they switch gears to Lane Kiffin. And, I think the first conversation happened maybe on Wednesday, and then on Thursday, Keith Carter and Jimmy Sexton jump on a plane and they fly to Boca, and Lane skips his radio show and visits with those guys for a few hours. And it's done on Friday. And, by middle of the afternoon on Friday, it leaks. There are a bunch of us that were kind of confirming it at about the same time. And then he goes out and drops 49 points in the championship game on Saturday, and last night gets the reception at the airport. And I think Keith Carter deserves a lot of credit for the way he ran the search.
I do like it. The only thing I wish it would have been handled differently, I wish when we hear reports of Matt Luke being relieved of his duties on the road while in a recruit's living room, I do wish that would have been.
Those are two separate things.
That was not true, though, Peter.
But is that okay? And that's why I'm glad you're bringing that up. So that's why I wanted to make sure, Richard, and that's why we have you on here about that, because I mean, again, what I think is important is that I don't think Lane Kiffin looks at Ole Miss as such an attractive job if Matt Luke hadn't done such a really good job kind of balancing the waters and recruiting so much of this young talent that Lane's going to have now.
Yeah, there was here you go. There was a Twitter report that Matt Luke found out via Twitter while he was in a recruit's living room. Mm-hmm. It's just not true. And, I mean, it's just not. That is patently false. Yes, he was on the road recruiting. I don't know if you're in a place anymore where once you make a decision like that and you start the process, you can actually keep the decision completely bottled up. And certainly it's disappointing that was the case, that Matt wasn't able to sit down across from Keith Carter and have that conversation. Obviously, they had that conversation, but Matt had to come back from being on the road in order to do that, and he knows what he's walking into. Look, I'm with you. I know you guys have talked about it before. I'm a huge Matt Luke fan, and I'm not just talking about on the field. I'm talking about personally. I've known his wife. She and I went to high school together. He's got kids that are the age of my kids. They're an absolutely fantastic family. So I kind of separate these two things. I mean, obviously, Matt Luke had to be relieved of his duties in order to get this Lane Kiffin thing going. But I think the job that Matt did, I think history will look fondly on the way he was able to kind of hold things together. But this is a